I think all of you know my name is Judy Johnson. I've been your host for these sessions, but I'm also your presenter today. I am a registered and licensed dietitian, licensed to practice in the state of Kansas. I'm a research instructor in the Department of Population Health at the KU School of Medicine in Wichita. I spent 18 years practicing clinical and management dietetics in hospitals in the Wichita area before leaving dietetic practice in 1989 and going into public health research and practice. So I have a lot of years of practicing dietetics, and I have maintained my credentials even though I don't practice per se. We're going to talk about healthy eating after cancer today. I am also a 27-year survivor of breast cancer, so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So making healthy choice the easy choice. So thinking about foods to increase and foods to limit. You notice I'm going to talk about food. I'm not going to talk about nutrients. When we make decisions about meal planning or what to purchase, we're thinking about food rather than nutrients by themselves. And so I think it's important to think in terms of food. And let's talk about how to modify our environments to support healthy eating. So there's been a lot of studies looking at specific foods and specific nutrients or dietary components that have possible associations for increasing or reducing cancer risk. And the studies in human populations have not shown definitively that any dietary component by itself causes or protects against cancer. So there is not that magic food that you can eat that's going to protect you against recurring cancer or first-time cancer. The American Cancer Society did update their guidelines for cancer survivors in June of 2020. And again, they're not significantly different than recommendations for everyone. And the first is get to and stay at a healthy body weight throughout life. If you're overweight or obese, even losing a few pounds can lower your risk for some types of cancer. It also lowers your risk for diabetes, type 2 diabetes. There have been significant studies all over the world where people have lost 10% of their body weight, which is not a huge amount of weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that's 20 pounds. And it has significantly decreased your risk of type 2 diabetes. The second recommendation is to eat a colorful variety of fruits and vegetables and plenty of whole grains and brown rice. Avoid or limit eating red meats such as beef, pork, and lamb, and processed meats such as bacon, sausage, deli meats, and hot dogs. Avoid or limit sugar-sweetened beverages, highly processed foods, and refined grain products. Again, thinking of whole grains in place of the refined white grains. It's best not to drink alcohol, but if you do, women should have no more than 1 drink per day, and men should have no more than 2. A drink is considered 12 ounces of regular beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounces of an 80 proof distilled spirit. People should eat whole foods, not individual nutrients, because evidence suggests that healthy dietary patterns are associated with reduced risk for cancer, especially colorectal and breast cancer. So they're saying, pay attention to your diet as opposed to turning to nutrient supplements. Cancer Support Community and Gilda's Club has similar dietary recommendations for cancer survivors. Keep your weight within a healthy range and avoid weight gain in adult life. Be physically active in your everyday life, walk more and sit less. And hopefully you heard Erin Spurgeon's great presentation a couple of weeks ago where she shared physical activity guidelines for all of us and gave us some exercises to do at home. And I'll be sending her slides to all of you here in the next couple of days. Eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans. Again, this is consistent with the ACS guidelines. Limit fast foods and other processed foods high in fat, starches, or sugars. Limit red meats and avoid processed meats. Limit sugar-sweetened drinks, limit alcohol, and do not use supplements for cancer prevention. I would encourage you to focus on behavior change rather than focusing on specific foods. Think about when and where you eat and how much you eat, as opposed to the specific foods that you you're going to depend on. Find or develop supportive networks. If you can find friends or family that are willing to make the dietary changes with you, it's going to be much easier to make those changes and maintain them. And a really important thing that I think a lot of us forget to do is modify our environments, the places where we live, learn, work, play, and pray, to support healthy eating. So make sure that healthy food choices are available in all of those places. It's important to be as lean as possible and do that by a balance of caloric intake and physical activity. One or the other by itself is not going to make it easy for you to maintain a healthy weight. So it's a balance of caloric intake and physical activity. Avoiding excessive weight gain throughout your life. Achieve and maintain healthy weight if you're currently overweight or obese. Consume a healthy diet with an emphasis on plant sources. And you see, I said an emphasis on plant sources. I'm not saying plant sources with no animal sources, but limiting your animal sources. Choose foods and beverages in amounts that help achieve and maintain a healthy weight. And this is really important, paying attention to our portion sizes. Eat 5 or more servings of a variety of fruits and vegetables each day, choosing whole grains in preference to processed, and limit your consumption of processed and red meats. Limit your alcohol consumption. This choosemyplate.gov is a really great website. I think I'm of the age, I grew up with the basic 4 food groups, which wasn't helpful at all because there was no idea of proportionality. It made it look like we needed the same amount of each of the food groups. I thought that the food guide pyramid was helpful, although it was confusing to a lot of people. And so the government has now gone to the choosemyplate.gov. And you can see that it's saying half of your plate should be filled with fruits and vegetables, slightly more vegetables than fruit, and the other half should be grain and protein, and there should be dairy in your meal as well. These are the guidelines. The dietary guidelines for Americans are updated every 5 years, and you may be thinking, why do they need to be updated so often? They're updated simply because the research continues. Nutrition is a relatively young science, and so if you look at this, it's saying that we need 2.5 cups of vegetables per day, and on a weekly basis, 1.5 cups should be dark green, 5.5 cups should be red or orange, 1.5 cups should be beans, peas, and lentils, 5 cups of starchy vegetables, and 4 cups of other vegetables. And this gives you an idea of that variety that we were talking about that will assure that you get the various nutrients from vegetables. We need the equivalent of 2 cups of fruit per day and the equivalent of 6 ounces of grains per day. 3 of those should be whole. Half of your grains should be whole. And then 3 cup equivalents of dairy products. I think a lot of times we think dairy is only important for growing children. It's very important for cancer survivors, particularly if you've been through chemo or radiation therapy, because these things can actually weaken the bones. And so the calcium in dairy products is the most absorbable and useful form of calcium. So including dairy products to try to prevent osteoporosis is really important. And then do include protein foods, 5.5 ounce equivalents per day. And then you see below that the breakdown in terms of weekly amounts. And you see that there's 8 ounces of seafood. And this comes down to the kinds of fats that we find in seafood. And the dietary guidelines for Americans say follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage, customize and enjoy nutrient-dense food and beverage choices to reflect your personal preferences, your cultural traditions, and your budgetary considerations. When we talk about nutrient-dense foods, we're talking about foods that, when you look at the nutrition label, they have vitamins and minerals, protein, carbohydrate, and fat. They are not empty or devoid of anything but just simple carbohydrates. So if you look at a soft drink label, for example, that is an example of a beverage choice that is not nutrient dense. It's simply calories without any nutrition. So you want to look at focusing on your food group needs with nutrient-dense foods and beverages while staying within your calorie limits. And pay attention to foods that are high in added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, and limit your alcohol. Emphasize plant-based foods. Half of your plate should be filled with fruits and vegetables. Women need 2 to 2.5 cups of vegetables a day, and men need 2.5 to 3. Women need 1.5 cups of fruit per day, and men need 2. And then make half of your grains whole or unprocessed. And then thinking about modifying your food environments, prepare fruits and vegetables before you refrigerate them so they're ready to eat, and then store them in clear containers at eye level in the refrigerator so it's the first thing you see when you open the door, and you're more likely to use them if they're ready to go. Try to avoid putting fruits and vegetables in the crisper drawers. Use those for condiments. Fruits and vegetables get forgotten and lost. I don't know about you, but I found some pretty disgusting stuff in my fruit and vegetable drawers because I forget that there are things in there. I think it's also smart to keep juice pack canned fruit in the refrigerator. We think of fruits and vegetables strictly as fresh, and fresh is great, but canned, if it's juice pack, is also a good source of fruit. When you're making recipes that have vegetables in them, just double the amount of vegetables in your recipes. And it's also nice to keep dried fruit in your desk drawer at work, and then you have that option. Although keep in mind that when fruit is dried, that the sugar is concentrated. So dried fruits are high in calories, high in sugar, and there can be an oral health issue because it can stick to your teeth. So do limit how much of the dried fruit you have. I always like to mix it with nuts, so I have a protein source as well. In terms of making your half of your grains whole, that we're talking about whole grain breads and cereals, brown rice as opposed to refined white rice, whole oats, whole rye, whole grain barley, and quinoa. Popcorn is a whole grain, although I do recommend that you avoid the prepackaged microwavable popcorn. Read your ingredient label and see that it says 100% whole wheat. A lot of times they'll have labels on the front of bread and cereals that say multigrain. And multigrain just means it has lots of different kinds of grain. It doesn't mean that they're whole. So you want to look at the ingredient list and make sure whole grain is at or near the top of the list, and then also look at the nutrient label and see that it contains 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving. Choose lean protein and modify your portion sizes. We in the Midwest tend to eat large meat portions, and the recommendation is 1 to 2 portions of 2 to 3 ounces each per day. 3-ounce portion of meat looks like a deck of cards if you think about the length, the width, and the thickness of a deck of cards, or a checkbook if it's thin sliced like roast beef or something like that. Limit the amount of red meat and processed meat, and choose chicken, fish, and beans more often than red meat. There are compounds in processed meat like bacon and sausage and lunch meats that are tied to cancer. And there's emerging evidence suggests that red meats may also increase cancer by promoting some of that low-grade inflammation I was talking about earlier. So diets that include high amounts of red meat seem to affect the bacteria that live in the gut, or what we call the gut microbiome, increasing microbes that can promote inflammation. So that's another reason to limit the amount of red meat that you eat. And why are we talking about fats at all? You heard Dr. Myers talk a little bit about omega-3s and omega-6s. And those are important in terms of cancer, and there's some research that shows that those are important in terms of cognitive function as well. But we also know that heart disease is the major cause of death among cancer survivors because of the toxicity of cancer treatments, and so fat in the diet is increasingly important for cancer survivors. Diets that are high in saturated fat and or cholesterol raise the bad cholesterol levels in the blood, the bad being the LDL and VLDL cholesterol. and that increases your cardiovascular risk. High intake of fat makes it difficult to avoid consuming more calories. Fat has 9 calories per gram, where carbohydrates and proteins only have 4 calories per gram. So if you're eating a diet that's high in fat, it's really difficult to avoid consuming excess calories. There's been a number of studies suggesting that omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids and saturated fats are more likely to increase the incidence of cancer. And yet, if you've been trying to eat a heart-healthy diet, you've seen recommendations to consume polyunsaturated fatty acids and avoid the saturated fats. Monounsaturated fats and omega-3 polyunsaturated fats are more likely to prevent or decrease the chance of cancer. But the research is insufficient. That's the way the research is pointing. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by omega-3s and omega-6s. Omega-3s and some omega-6 fatty acids tend to promote inflammation. And the recommendation is that omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid in the diet ratio is 4.0 or less. But the typical American diet tends to contain 15 to 25 times more omega-6 fatty acid than omega-3 fatty acid. Here are your sources of these two types. And if you look at that list of oils under omega-6, these are the ones that are generally recommended for heart-healthy diets. And you also see grain-fed meats in that list of containing omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are found primarily in fish, flaxseed, chia seeds, soybeans, walnuts, tofu, and then canola oil, which is also known as rapeseed oil, although in the United States we call it canola oil. But the higher fat fishes that I've listed there are higher in omega-3s. I always have people ask me, what about olive oil? Olive oil contains both. And depending on the individual oil, it may contain about 10 to 1 omega-6s to omega-3 fatty acid. So it contains some of both. So what are some ideas for eating out to help you eat a healthy diet? My recommendation is that you ask for a to-go box to be brought when your meal is brought to the table, so that you can actually divide it and put what you want to take home and in the box, and keep just what you want to eat half of it. If you leave it on your plate and ask for the box later, the temptation is to just keep eating, and then you've overeaten a lot of times. Share an entree rather than order individual entrees. Avoid all-you-can-eat options if possible. And if you do end up at a buffet with an all-you-can-eat option, think in advance how many items you're going to choose, as opposed to, I'm going to fill my plate, but I'm going to choose 3 items or 5 items and so on. When you're at social gatherings, don't accept food or drink from others. Make a decision that you're going to pick up the food or the drink. At home, my recommendation is, instead of putting serving dishes on the table, prepare plates with specific servings of food. And unless you work in food service, it's very difficult to know if your portions are on track. So my recommendation is that you periodically weigh and measure your servings, so you know what a 3-ounce serving of meat looks like, and you know what a cup of vegetables looks like, and so on.